Welcome back to the Demanding Value Podcast. We have an incredible episode for you today. Something really exciting happened back on March 31st of this year, 2021. Medtronic, the largest medical device company in the world, and Spectrum Health, a 14 hospital system based in Western Michigan and Grand Rapids, Michigan, announced a partnership. That partnership is a value-based care agreement to create better patient outcomes at the most cost-effective pricing for patients that they serve. This is where everyone wants to get to. True value-based care, truly partnering with your customers and suppliers together to come up with the best solutions. So, Kristen Sinke is the Director of Value Analysis at Spectrum Health, and Cori Maegley is the Senior Director of Value-Based Healthcare Partnerships at Medtronic. We spend time dissecting this agreement, value-based partnerships overall, what's the difference between that and a risk share agreement. So much great information here from Kristen and Cori, and I'm thrilled to bring it to you. Enjoy.
Well, Kristen and Cori, thank you so much for joining us here on the Demanding Value Podcast. So we are here with Kristen Sinke and Cori Maegley. So I'm just going to read a brief introduction for each of you guys. So Kristen Sinke is the Director of Value Analysis at Spectrum Health, and Cori Maegley is the Senior Director of Value-Based Healthcare Partnerships at Medtronic. And I got to tell you, I am so excited to talk to both of you guys because the agreement that you both announced together is exactly what the Demanding Value Podcast is all about. It's about value-based care and creating partnerships from the vendor and provider side. So just a brief intro for Spectrum Health. Spectrum Health is headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a hospital system comprised of 14 hospitals, 150 ambulatory sites, and over 31,000 employees, which is tremendous. And Medtronic, my former employer actually, is the largest medical device company in the world, operating in over 150 countries with over 90,000 employees with a market cap of over $176 billion. So we're really dealing with two behemoths here, and I'm just so excited about it. So the reason I'm having both of you guys on today is the agreement that was announced this year on March 31st. So I'm just going to read a couple of the highlights from that because there's so much to dive into and unpack in regards to what was laid out there. So in the announcement, it said that Spectrum Health and Medtronic announced the collaboration to drive value in healthcare for patients in Western Michigan, designed to improve patient outcomes and reduce cost of care. And together, the organizations will use data and near real-time analytics to design programs intended to help standardize care, reduce clinical variation, and deliver greater personalization of care by applying the right medical technologies and therapies to patients who may benefit most. And it looks like it's starting in the cardiac space. So right there that's the holy grail of what everybody wants to do, right? Increase patient care, decrease cost and variation. And now you guys are partnering up to deliver that. And it's funny, partnership it's like a cliche. Oh, we want to partner with our company, with our customers, but rarely does it actually happen together in such a formalized way. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Cori. Happy to be here.
So just really quick, Kristen, what are your key responsibilities? So your title is Director of Value Analysis at Spectrum Health. What are your key responsibilities?
Yeah. So for those that are not familiar with value analysis, we are a team comprised of mostly nurses within supply chain. And our key responsibilities are really to look at the clinical efficacy of the products that we are bringing into our organization, whether those are new products that are being requested by providers or they're products that we've been using historically, but maybe need to look at, are they really delivering the outcomes and the value that we would expect of them? And so we manage all those new product requests. We then have oversight of product trials, product implementation, and again, that outcome tracking and diving into some of the savings that are associated with those outcomes that benefit the organization and the patient as well. I also have oversight over our product recalls and any sort of clinical quality concerns or defects that are coming from our clinicians, and really looking to investigate those or work with suppliers to find substitute products in the event of a recall or the need to pull something due to quality concerns. In addition to that, we have this newer arm of our program that is our outcome-based partnership program. Medtronic clearly being our first and foremost there, but we have dedicated nurses that are focused on really driving the conversations with our suppliers to develop these partnerships and to work together really differently.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So, and Cori, how about you? Your key responsibilities in your role?
Sure. Thanks, Gary. So I do sit within the Americas region. So while Medtronic is organized into 20 different operating units, those are really focused around the way our products and therapies are organized, specific product lines, specific disease states and conditions. We are supported by a group that is aligned to specific regions. And so I sit within the Americas region in the US market specifically. My main responsibilities are managing these value-based healthcare partnerships and the programs that we construct together and co-develop together and align within these partnerships. So Spectrum Health is one of 4 value-based healthcare partnerships we have across the country. They were the 4th and most recent announcement. Unique for us in that it's led out of value analysis and supply chain. So we're really excited to see how we change that relationship between traditional medtech suppliers and healthcare providers. And a lot of my responsibilities center around not only uncovering needs within Spectrum Health, but then how do we work across the entire Medtronic enterprise, those 20 operating units that I mentioned, to bring the right technologies and programs to bear on the partnership based on Spectrum Health's priorities and where they want to go.
Got it. Got it. Excellent. So, Kristen, how do you define value-based care, and what role do you see vendors playing in that?
Gary, that's a huge question.
I know. That's why I
define value-based healthcare. Well, I think certainly there's the definitions that are rolling around within the industry and some of the regulatory bodies. But for me, from a provider perspective, that value-based healthcare is specifically from just the provider perspective, is making sure that what we are doing it for the right patient at the right time with very specific clinical outcomes in mind. And that we not only hope or expect to get these outcomes, but that we ensure that we get these outcomes. And if we don't, then we as clinicians and as people in the science industry need to go back and figure out why and continue to troubleshoot to really make sure that we're getting those outcomes for our patients that they deserve. In regard to our partnerships with suppliers, and I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier, right? In that the term partnership has been thrown around to the point where you don't even want to say it anymore when you're talking about providers and suppliers, because it's like, oh, it's not really a real thing. And one of the things that I've been challenging some of our key strategic suppliers, such as Medtronic, is come to the table, right? Just really actually partner with us, stand behind your products and help us achieve those outcomes that you've been telling me for years that you want our patients to realize. Well, let's work together to do it outside of just that transactional relationship. Let's really collaborate to realize those outcomes for our patients, because it behooves both of us, right? It behooves the provider and the supplier as well. So to me, back to your question, in that supplier provider partnership, it is that true collaboration with the patient centered as the focus of our work.
Got it. Cori, anything to add to that?
No, just that, Gary, for us as Medtronic, I think oftentimes when people hear about technology innovation, they assume that those innovations are going to come at a very high cost. And I think our challenge as a med tech company in these value-based partnerships is to show how the thoughtful application of technology, like Kristen said, the right technology, the right patient, the right time, really mapping that to the impact we can have on improving patient outcomes and lowering the overall cost of care. And as a med tech company, we're really challenged. How do you innovate, but recognize that innovation has cost implications for the hospital, and therefore it's even more important to map the impact of that innovation and those technologies on patient outcomes to make sure we're really clear on where value creation is happening.
Yeah. So Kristen, you said that, you want the vendors to come to the table and stand behind what they claim that they can deliver. So is this a way for a vendor to differentiate themselves?
Absolutely. To be really honest, and Cori has heard this before, so no surprise to her there. We wanted to go down this journey towards value, and we were looking at several of our strategic suppliers and really having conversations very similar to what we had with Medtronic in outlining our vision and talking about what that could and should look like. And it really, Medtronic stood out. They did. They were very, I think, transparent and aligned in our vision of what that could look like. It didn't come with, you're going to increase your spend with us by X amount, and then we will collaborate with you on these 3 projects. It really didn't have to do with that. It really was about how do we come together in this really unique way, in a way that others in the industry aren't doing. And so, yeah, it did have them stand out for us. And quite honestly, has shaped even further our relationship with them moving forward, because I feel like we've seen a little bit behind the curtain and really feel like there's altruism there in what they're trying to achieve.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's wonderful. So now if a vendor wants to do that and they say, hey, we want to stand behind our products with you, even on a contractual basis,
Mhm.
am I correct? And this is for either one of you guys that, well, I think Kristen, you mentioned tracking the outcomes.
Mhm.
Whatever the product claims to do, the outcome needs to be trackable. And so therefore, is that the benchmark to say, well, we can't partner with you if what you're claiming can't be quantified in a trackable way?
Yes and no. I think in my mind, there's 2 different types of partnerships. There's what you would maybe consider those typical risk share partnerships, where it is that contractual way, where if you do X and Y, you will see Z. And if you don't see Z, we will reimburse you in this way, or we will cut the price of this in this way. And so that's in my mind one bucket of things. The other bucket is what we're doing with the value-based healthcare partnership, in that it's not necessarily linking it every time to a contract associated with a product, but actually saying we have this clinical outcome that we desire to improve. How do we bring our teams together to operationalize it? And so it really doesn't. Now, that being said, it can coordinate with an outcomes based contract, right? It can be something where we have this existing contract with Medtronic, and maybe we're not seeing the outcomes that we want, or we're having a hard time finding set outcomes, because to your point, tracking is difficult. And I think it's something that providers everywhere struggle with, whether it's the analytics to do it, or it's the manpower to actually dedicate to finding it and extracting it and analyzing it. And so that can be part of that partnership too, where it's like, help us figure out how to track it. And I recognize fully that I did not answer your question there. I do think things have to be trackable to some degree, right? If it's a specific outcome that you're calling out, then yes, it has to be something that is documented. It has to be something that you can follow up on. However, it also could just overall impact many things in slight ways that reduces that total cost of care, whether it's during an inpatient stay, or from our payer perspective, our health plan perspective, lowering the PMPM for that patient or that member, because we're reducing readmissions over the course of a year, or we're reducing provider visits. And so there are other ways to look at the reduction in cost for the patient and for the provider and for the payer, outside of a very specific outcome that has to be, say, documented in the EHR.
See, that's fascinating to me because you just differentiated risk share type agreements from a true collaborative partnership. And I think the vast majority of folks, in my opinion, automatically think risk share. But this sounds like it's a little more than that.
Yeah, and Gary, I would say one of the things that makes the partnership unique is that focus not only on dropping in risk share agreements, because Medtronic and other vendors have these, they exist today. I think one of the challenges is a lot of those risk share agreements put the burden of tracking and applying for these rebates or whatever structure we're using on the part of the health system. And I think what really makes this value-based healthcare partnership between Spectrum Health and Medtronic unique is through alignment from the CEOs of the two organizations on down, that there's a commitment to resources, to mirrored project teams where there's joint investment in both sides in helping contribute to and analyze data sets that get eyes on some of these risk stratified populations. And then we can think about what care pathways are surrounding those cohorts of patients and how do we optimize. I think one of the challenges for us as a supplier is in these risk shares, there's a lot of elements of care that we as a vendor don't control. And so working jointly with Spectrum Health to look at the care pathways, how we're driving compliance and eliminating variation within those pathways, the combination of the analytics and the care pathway work allows us to be really thoughtful about how we're aligning that appropriate technology to appropriate points of care within that pathway. And that makes a much more attractive environment where we can get much more creative about the way we develop business models that take accountability on both sides for those outcomes. And so I think the risk shares are one way, but to me, it's almost how you walk before you crawl, before you run. So just wanted to throw that out there.
No, absolutely. And so Cori, from the vendor side, my own experience, I'm curious if you've experienced this as well, is you might have a wonderful medical device technology that you have evidence that says, listen, this has proven positive clinical outcomes. The problem is it's more expensive. So supply chain pushes back because it's a negative hit to their budget, yet no one is arguing the improvement in quality of care and the total cost of care. So one, that tends to be a hurdle that vendors have to get over. But it sounds like in Spectrum and in Medtronic, there is top level engagement at the CEO level that says we understand the bigger picture, and that's what we're looking to impact. So the question here is, one, I guess, Cori, do you agree that tends to be a hurdle that is still out there? But number two, how did you guys get top level C-suite people to engage at this level? Because it's very hard. A lot of times the C-suite is looking at it to say, just get the better price. Just our goals are aligned to that. Whereas the bigger picture is where the real value is. So I guess, Cori, could you start with that?
I do agree that is a hurdle that is still out there, Gary. And, in some of our relationships with supply chain within health systems, it's still highly transactional. And some of it depends on how the health system is aligned, how folks within supply chain are incentivized. I can't, we have sales reps that are incentivized to sell products, and health systems have supply chain individuals who are incentivized on category cost reductions. And so some of this is alignment of incentives, and that's just the reality of where we are within the US market today, I think, and it's highly variable. I think one of the things that made this relationship take off in the way that it did was the orientation of Spectrum Health supply chain leadership in saying we need to change this. And And they've done an analysis that looks at, based on their average Medicare reimbursement, supplies represent maybe 15% of that total cost of care around a patient. And there's greater than a 15% delta between current reimbursement rates and the actual cost of care. So, as some of Kristen's colleagues like to say, they could drive supply costs to zero and they still wouldn't get where they need to be with cost reductions. And so they've had an appetite to look with us beyond the cost of supplies and how those supplies are influencing overall cost of care. And I think that's what made Spectrum Health unique and why this partnership took off in the way that it did.
Yeah. So Kristen, how did Spectrum get to that level? Because a lot of hospital systems are not there yet.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to steal Cori's crawl, walk, run analogy. The things that I mentioned on the front end of this podcast in regard to evaluating the new products and running the trials and implementation, that's the foundation, right? That's one of the core pillars of value analysis. But through the maturation of our program and with that top level support, we've been able to look further than that and to look beyond that and to look at the things that we're talking about, specifically to your example, Gary, of this is more expensive, but it's going to reduce your length of stay, or it's going to eliminate the need to go to the ICU and you can go right to a med surg unit, which obviously lowers the total cost of care. And so once we started looking at things differently and looking beyond just product procurement, we were able to develop a couple of those examples and share them with our senior leaders and really say, look, like, yes, we are spending more on this, but we're going to follow it. We're going to track those outcomes. One of the things that our value analysis program, I think, is good at doing is looking at those outcomes, following them, but then connecting with our physician leaders and saying, look, it is more expensive, but we believe in the evidence. Let's give it 6 months. Let's come back 6 months from now and look at those clinical outcomes and have an honest discussion about if we're seeing what we expect to see. And, a lot of times we do, right? And it's like, fantastic. Then let's spread this. Let's get all of our divisions doing this because it's clearly making a difference. There's times where it doesn't, and where we create an exit strategy and say, you know what, we're either having the same, usually not worse outcomes, but maybe the same outcomes, but we're spending more. And so let's go back to what we were doing, and we'll continue to try to look for something innovative within the industry. And that outcome tracking for us started about 2.5 years ago. And then just recently in 2021, are we actually now quantifying the savings associated with those outcomes and calling them out as organizational run rate savings, which is a new thing and kind of that next evolution of outcomes for us. In regard to kind of the second half of your question of that top level engagement, and certainly Cori can speak to her senior leaders at Medtronic, but I just have to say that we're very blessed and lucky that we have those innovative thinkers leading Spectrum Health. And this is in no way, shape, or form disingenuous at all. They get it. They really do get it. And they've made an investment in this work because they see it as the future of the industry. They genuinely see it as the direction we need to be moving in order to be sustainable and to continue to deliver that top quality care for our patients.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a hard push. Honestly, it was a, hey guys, here's all the things that we've done to look into this. Here's everything we've looked for in a partner. Here's the partner that we think makes the best fit and really aligns with us. What do you think? Would you be willing to sit down with their senior leaders and have a really honest discussion? And they were.
Yeah. Cori, any thoughts on that?
Not much more to add. I think Kristen did a really good job of capturing it. I would say, Gary, that that focus on the intent is something that starts from the top down, and without that buy-in from the senior leaders on both sides, it's really hard to create the foundation of trust that I think is really essential for this work to happen. So that executive alignment becomes really important to make sure people understand the true intent of the partnership, and to overcome the obvious skepticism that we often run into, that this is just a way for Medtronic to gain greater access to sell more products at the end of the day. And so making sure that there's transparency, appropriate governance and oversight, and the right legal and privacy agreements in place to do this work in the right way becomes really important, as is the leadership buy-in to help us overcome that resistance where we do see it.
Yeah, excellent. So Kristen, I could be wrong, but I feel like there's something beneath one of the things that you mentioned there, run rate savings. So is that I could presume, I know what a run rate is and I know what savings is, but is that a metric that you are now able to look at based on your 2 years of quantified tracked outcomes? Or I'll just leave it alone. What is that? And is it a key metric? Tell me about it.
Sure, it absolutely is. As I mentioned, it's a new metric for us in 2021. Really spent the majority. Well, we didn't spend much in 2020 outside of COVID, but 2019 and 2020 developing what that would look like for us, and looking for the right resources to help support it. And so I mentioned again that top level support. We were invested in another way with a clinical database specialist within my team, who is an RN with oodles of experience, whose job is to learn the tools and get in there and find the data. But then, because she is an RN, has that clinical mind to be able to really evaluate and link those outcomes and say, yes, this is doing what we wanted to do. No, it's not. And then partnering with our friends in finance to really say, all right, so if our baseline showed this, and here's the line where we started using this product, and now here's our new data, whether it's length of stay or reduction in a hack, or I mentioned, like avoiding an ICU stay, a myriad of things, you can link that directly to savings. And so value analysis, for the first time at Spectrum Health, has a operational savings target that we are accountable for and are working toward that. And that's bringing everything together. So that is not specific to our value-based healthcare partnership with Medtronic, certainly a part of it though, right? And so it could be those new products coming into the organization that are changing improving outcomes for our patients. It could be developing some of those additional risk share contracts with suppliers. It can be the projects that we're doing with Medtronic. And so all of those different things are really feeding into that. But it's new, and it's been I'm not going to lie, it's been a really tough road, but we're very proud of the savings we've been able to achieve thus far in the year.
Yeah. So it really does. I mean, this is everyone, because total cost of care is so comprehensive. My understanding from what you're saying is there are so many people that need to be involved in different departments, in finance, in supply chain, at the C-suite, in order to truly say, hey, let's be in this together and quantify and work together. Is that accurate?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So specific to this agreement that was announced, because it's very, very exciting. So Cori, we'll start with you. So from Medtronic's point of view, what are the goals of the agreement, if you're able to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our goals in entering into these partnerships and these kind of agreements are pretty simple, Gary. Our commitment as a company, going back to the company's mission, which has been in place for 60 years now, is to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life for patients, right? And so that focus on driving better patient outcomes, better patient experience is really at the core, I think, of what both we and Spectrum Health want to get out of this. It is about the patients first. I think for us as a company, what that really means is clear opportunities to accelerate our innovations, our understanding of how our products are impacting patient outcomes and total cost of care. So these partnerships provide important visibility for us about the impact of our technologies, but also an opportunity for us to deliver this in deliver the innovations in a way that contributes to a better patient and provider experience, right? So we're learning a lot. It's not just about deploying technologies, but thinking about how they integrate with data and analytics, thinking about how they integrate with care pathways, and it's the way those technologies are essentially woven into the walls of the health system and woven into that overall patient experience. So I would say those are our main goals,
Yeah.
and partnerships provide an important environment in which we can learn, in which we've established trust and visibility to the impact of our products. And so they're very unique and special in that regard.
Isn't that interesting? The largest medical device company in the world can always learn more, and through a partnership like this, it gives you a unique window into the impact that your products have.
Yeah, and I think, Gary, specifically, and one of our aims as a company, if you look at our new leadership under Jeff Martha, there's a lot of focus on turning data and artificial intelligence into actionable insights that can improve care, right? And so this is this space is evolving at a really rapid rate, right? And so we cannot afford to rest on our laurels and the performance that we have to assume that it's not going to be disrupted tomorrow. This space is getting very crowded. There are emerging players all over the place. And so we do need to be a learning organization that is continually learning and adapting, because the landscape's changing very fast.
Yeah, great. So Kristen, from your point of view for this specific agreement, can you share what Spectrum's goals are?
As far as the partnership overall, or with our,
Yeah.
I mean, Cori hit the nail on the head several times there with really improving patient outcomes. At the end of the day, that is our goal. We want to provide exceptional care to our patients, and we want to do it at the lowest possible cost to our patients. That is a way in which we can thrive as an organization, but it's also a way that we can give back to our community in West Michigan by providing that affordable care.
Yeah.
Certainly there's underlying things, as Cori mentioned, as in regard to things that we would like to see come out of this, that are, I think everybody within healthcare is going to say that they put the patient first, right? Like you're not going to be like, I put this first. It's always the patient first, and it should be. And my friends in our quality department are doggedly working to improve outcomes, and my friends in nursing and the providers, and everybody is focused on doing this. And we're one arm of that. We're supply chain, and we're looking at how can we contribute. Like, yes, clearly supply chain historically has helped with those line item savings and getting products at the lowest possible cost, but how can we do more to actually impact? And so when we talked early about a lot of those tech and analytics resources and the evidence and just the manpower that coming together provides us, we genuinely believe that by coming together, we'll do better faster. And so that's a main goal for us, for sure.
So to get a little bit into the nitty gritty, measuring outcomes, it is part of it. So can either of you, we'll start with Kristen, elaborate on the technology that you're using and or developing in order to track the outcomes that this partnership is fostering?
Yeah, so from the Spectrum side, a lot of it is really manual still. It's straight up going into our EHR and going, trying to filter by a specific supply or a specific code, and then getting the list of 400 patients and doing chart deep dives and looking through. And that's clearly not the sustainable long-term goal of how we're doing this. But we're still at that point where we need to show that this is going to pay off at some point. We have tools available to us as well that supplement that. And so we work with our GPO, and we work with Lumiere, which is a neutral third party, that is very evidence-based, and we use them for a lot of our value analysis processes. And so we can dig in through there a bit. But really that clinical database specialist, and then again, our friends in finance and quality and different registries that are available, we certainly use those when we're able to. It's a lot of just kind of hard work and plugging through them.
Yep. And how about from Cori, from Medtronic's point of view, do you have technology that you're able to share with Spectrum, or are you developing technology for this outcomes tracking? How is that working?
I think that when it comes to the data and analytics side of this, Gary, it's less about the technology we're contributing, although we are trying to knit together device information with patient information and records. But I think a lot of it is about the analytics expertise and horsepower we're able to bring to the table. So when we set out with a specific project, there's a very clear statement of work that is laid out that specifically articulates what data elements will be shared, right? Because we want to make sure that above all, we're safeguarding patient privacy. This isn't about Medtronic receiving tons of patient records from Spectrum. So the data is very carefully protected. We agree on what data elements will be shared. It's done in a way that remains behind the Spectrum Health firewall to safeguard that patient privacy. But it's all about trying to glean insights. And like Kristen said, how do we merge EMR data with device data with other registries that may exist, and draw from it analytics and insights that can be used to inform decisions about where technology is applied and how it's applied. So I would say it's less about the specific technologies, because there's multiple platforms that you can use to do that work. It's more about understanding the outcomes we can influence with technology and pathway work, and making sure we have clear line of sight to how we provide insights back about that work and the impact over time.
Got it.
Yeah,
So,
I think if I can piggyback on that for a half a second too, I think, Cori, I don't want to lose sight of what she just said too, of the outcome tracking is just one piece on the continuum of where we're trying to go. It's really, what do we do with those outcomes then? And how do we use it to really further define our care pathways, or to course correct and say, we're going to try this differently because, and so that's really where we're at right now, is that analytical piece of, and now what are we going to do with this?
Yeah, yeah. And from a nuts and bolts, I understand there's so much more to it, but it's interesting. I wrote down that you have a clinical database specialist, and you've mentioned that person a couple of times. So you have devoted a resource, and I'm sure more resources specifically to that, which I think that's probably a best practice for a healthcare system that really wants to dive into this. They need to apply resources. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. Yeah, it's an investment, but we've found it very worthwhile investment.
Yeah. So Kristen, Medtronic is the largest medical device company in the world. So they have resources to apply to this. How can a small to medium size device supplier or pharmaceutical provider, if they say, listen, we want to stand behind our products, we think we can have an impact, is there a place for them in a partnership like this?
Of course. I have those conversations frequently with other suppliers as well. Not everybody is a Medtronic, and that's okay. It's really the idea that suppliers are not the enemy. They are valuable partners. And so whether it's a multi-division project with Medtronic, or it's we're having issues with CLABSIs in a particular ICU, and so we partner with the supplier that you know we use for our dressing change kits, or maybe it's the actual catheter company. How do we come together and do some process improvement work and really look at some root cause initiatives and some problem solving there? I think regardless of the size of your company, if you're willing to partner in those ways, those are things that providers absolutely want and value. And to Cori's point earlier, it behooves both sides, because they're learning as well, and how to share that best practice with other customers. And I think that that's very valuable as well. And then I think also going back to the contractual piece of, there's always, and that may be more of that medium to large size supplier, but the ability to contractually commit to, here's what we're telling you you're going to see. And if you don't see it, here's what we will do to help you out there, is a little bit less hands-on, but more obviously financially, you've got to be able to support the outcomes there. So it's a spectrum. And I think it could even go as far as, if we do roll something out, how are you going to support us in the education? How are you going to come out and relieve some of that burden from our educators and from our value analysis program specialists, and get to some of our regional locations that are a couple hours away and help us with that education? That's partnership too.
Yes, yes. And then Cori, how about from a hospital system standpoint? So you're a large organization, but are there some hospital systems that the smaller and medium size that might want to do this, but have you had experience that maybe they're just not ready? And or how does that work from your point of view?
Yeah, so again, Gary, the partnerships we've worked with under these special value-based healthcare partnership umbrellas vary in size and profile. You don't have to be an academic medical center to take on this work. We've had health systems that are much more operationally and regionally focused, but I think one of the things I've noticed is that oftentimes the largest health systems don't necessarily have the need for the resources and capabilities we can provide, because they already have very well developed clinical analytics and informatics teams. They have entire teams of people who manage operational dashboards for the health system. So I do think there's a sweet spot, and it's an organization that has an appetite to apply the analytics and learn with us, but maybe doesn't have a whole team to bring to the table. So even if they just have one clinical analytics resource that does data extraction from their EMR, we've worked with individual clinical analysts to do that work. So I think it's not necessarily something that is reserved for the biggest out there. And in fact, sometimes those are the health systems that don't need our support, but there is a very large middle ground of health systems that want to evolve their understanding of these insights, not only about outcomes, but things like clinical variation and pathway adherence, which we know contributes to the robustness of those outcomes. So there's a lot we can do regardless of the size of the analytics teams. And one of the things we've thought about as a company is, as we learn from these programs, can we mature things like data extraction guides, where we turn over a very strong understanding of the data elements we think are necessary and where they could go get those within their electronic medical record. So the more we learn, the more we can mature the documentation we hand over at the start that says, hey, if you go get these data elements, we think we can get started. So I think that helps a lot.
Got it. So I had Mina Medler. She is a leader in forming partnerships with Premier. She was on the Demanding Value podcast and talking about Premier's focus on creating value-based partnerships. How much is Kristen, is your GPO involved in your value-based agreements?
A lot of our value-based agreements within procurement, and I would have to really defer on some of my friends within strategic sourcing to give you a very specific answer, because I simply just don't have that. But I do think that a lot of those agreements, that it is some of that sharing of the risk, are done either in partnership or outside of the GPO, and are more of those kind of local contracts. But certainly we lean on our GPO for different platforms that we leverage with them, that are sort of those add-on platforms that give us some more of those quality insights and things along those lines. It's a tool that our clinical database specialist currently uses, and they've been very helpful to us along this journey as well too. But the contracting piece, I'm just going to have to defer.
Yeah, that's okay. So let's talk about do's and don'ts. So So this agreement was launched a few months ago. Actually, before we get to do's and don'ts, because I think do's and don'ts are a good way to round things out here. How is it going? It's been out there now for a few months. It's, I think, 4 full months now. How's it going?
Yeah, Cori, do you want to take first stab?
Yeah, I would say from our standpoint, Gary, it's going really well. I would say the relationships are solidifying. I think there's a great working relationship developing. We've been able to gain a greater understanding of the current projects and pathways within Spectrum Health, which I think really helps us inform where future programs could go. I think the challenge is always as you decide what projects you want to work on, there are so many different considerations. One of those considerations is, of the many initiatives and projects within Spectrum Health, how do we get ourselves on the radar and aligned to something that they see as high priority, right? Our priorities as a company and the most important, or maybe not the most important, but the things we think we could most easily pursue may not line up with the needs they have from us at the time. So I feel like where a lot of the challenges we're encountering are, and where we will move faster over time, is understanding each other's priorities so that we can select projects that are mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to throw a bunch of stuff out there and vet it to learn, hey, we think we have an opportunity here. Oh yeah, maybe not as much opportunity as we thought. So rather than chase it, let's divert our attention to where there's more bang for the buck for both sides. So
Yeah.
I would say that's it's going really well in terms of the mechanics of how we're working on this together. I think it just takes a little bit of time to dial it in to make sure that we're selecting the right projects that can move fast because they're critically important to both sides.
Okay, Kristen.
Yeah, I also think it's going very well. So I'm very glad to hear that you do too, Cori. As you were talking, I came up in my mind this analogy that, we this is so corny, but like we were dating before, and like now maybe we've moved in together. And so we're like really feeling things out and figuring out what patterns are gonna stick. And
Yeah.
so I'm very glad as my dating partner, Cori, that you agree that this is a good thing.
We'll live together at least a couple more years.
I feel like we'll stick it out for sure. So on the Spectrum Health side, it's been great, honestly. One of the things, so clearly Cori's team is all in, right? This is what they do. They live and breathe it every day. They're all in. My team is all in. As we've mentioned, supply chain leadership is all in, and then our C-suite leadership is all in. And then there's this space in the middle. And so we've been spending a lot of time just meeting with people and talking about what this partnership is, and just getting their minds spinning so that they can come to us and really say, hey, this is something that's really important to us. Where do you think you could play in this space? And so since the announcement, we've been doing a lot of that. And what we're seeing now is a lot of those leaders coming to us and putting those ideas out there for us versus us kind of pushing away and trying to find it like we were doing maybe in the early months. And so I'm very pleased with that. I think that that's fantastic. And it's exactly what we want, because we want to do projects not for the sake of doing them or for the sake of the partnership, but to really support Spectrum Health strategic initiatives within the clinical service line. So that's fantastic. It's also been really exciting selfishly from my perspective, in that it's gotten the industry talking, right? Certainly we wouldn't be here now if people weren't talking. And so we're having really innovative discussions with suppliers on how do we do things like that, or we want to do something like this. We'll just tell us what organizations would be looking for, because a lot of, as much as maybe some organizations are at a maturity standpoint to embark on this, as you and Cori were talking about earlier, there's certainly that side on the supplier piece as well too, where they understand the vision, they agree with it, but they're still in that building phase. And so wanting to learn from a provider what makes sense to you, what doesn't make sense to you. And those are the kind of conversations I can have all day long. I love it. And so I think what's been really maybe most exciting for me outside of the specific positive embracing within Spectrum Health is just the conversations that are starting in healthcare in general. It's, I think, exactly what we need in the industry.
That's great. That was one of my questions. Are you getting more companies now that are interested in engaging in these sorts of partnerships since the announcement? It sounds like you are.
Yep, for
Yep.
sure.
Okay, so do's and don'ts. So let's start. Kristen, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Your top do's and your top don'ts in saying, okay, we want to engage in this in a value-based partnership with a supplier. What are the top, hey, you have to focus on these things, almost like a litmus test to say, hey, this is what we got to get going, and some key lessons that, oh wow, you don't, that's a big time waste.
Okay, so hard do's. You have to have that senior level support. Like that's, I'm glad you touched on it earlier because that's an absolute must. I believe that you have to have the engagement, whether it's, clearly this partnership is led through value analysis. I know that Cori and some of the other partnerships have been led through maybe their quality departments, but you have to have engagement and understanding of the work that you do in a certain level of maturity prior to being able to embark on that. And so I think that's an absolute do. I would say a don't is do not settle for a value-based partnership is based solely on contractual savings or based solely on mitigating risk based on those outcomes. It's so much more. And so quite frankly, when other suppliers come to us and it's strictly that risk share, I'm like, that's really great. And you can talk to sourcing, but that's not a value-based partnership to me. And so I think don't do that. If I were talking to a group of suppliers on the do's and don'ts, I would say the biggest don't is don't tie it to commercial growth. Don't do it. You got to be in it for the right reasons. And if you can't bring that piece to the table and say, we'll be agnostic on this, it's not a value-based partnership.
Wow, that was fantastic. Now, Cori, it's going to be harder for you because one of my criteria is you can't say the same thing that Kristen said.
Awesome. This is where going second is sometimes a challenge. So
Yeah.
first of all, 100% agree with everything that has been said. I would add to the do list, do plan to commit some resources to making it successful, right? And I don't want to trivialize this, this takes some horsepower from both sides. It takes a willingness to invest people's time and energy into it. And especially in the beginning, as you're, so another one of my do's is do create the right legal framework, the right governance and oversight framework. I think governance and oversight, not to slow things down, but to make sure potential barriers are identified and removed, like the right governance and engagement in that governance process is critically important. So I'll add those two, do commit the resources and do commit to the governance and oversight and the engagement of that to make it successful. I would say on the don'ts, one don't I would add to the list is don't bring the providers in too early before they really understand the intent of what we're trying to drive in the partnership. And so that may be in some ways a do, which is the internal stakeholder engagement and management on both sides. Because, while Kristen is working with, physicians and on the provider side, we also have 20 operating units who don't do this work on a day-to-day basis, who need to understand the intent of what we're trying to drive in the partnerships and why some of their more traditional or historic commercial behaviors may not be appreciated in that context. So I would say don't bring in project teams until they have a robust understanding of the partnership, its intent, and how things are going to work. So hopefully that's a couple. And I don't think I repeated anything.
You didn't, and that was brilliant.
And that's not something that I ever would have thought of, frankly. And I think really the keys for the do's and don'ts are, this is different. This is different. So you need to think differently and you need to act differently. And if your key stakeholders in each organization are not fully aware of the different approach here, they're going to operate business as usual, which may be contrary to this type of a partnership. Is that fair?
Spot on. Yeah, but it doesn't work without them either. So it's not like we can't just work around some of these folks who don't understand, right? And so they are critical participants, but everybody needs to recognize that it's a little bit of a different mindset. And so educating about that early and often, I think is critically important.
Excellent. Well, you know, sometimes we all don't know the impact that we have in the world and in our day-to-day activities. I genuinely think that the agreement and the partnership that you guys have fostered is true. It's not only changing the industry, but it is truly changing and impacting patient lives. We may never know the specific individual. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. But I think there is no question it will positively impact patient lives. And so I think when you guys rest your head on the pillow at night, you should know, and I'm saying this from an outside observer, you should know you are having a positive impact in the industry and with the patients that you're affecting every day. So thank you for doing this. And thank you so much for sharing, because that's part of it. In order to change the industry and to have a greater impact on patient lives, we need to get this information out there. And you've been willing, instead of saying, oh, let's do this behind closed doors, there's competition and so forth, let's open it up. And we need more leadership out there like the two of you, Kristen and Cori. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. And please feel free to come to all of my daily meetings and just make me feel good about myself. I appreciate all the kind words.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gary. I second the vote. I would love your voiceover over my entire day to add the color commentary. I think it's incredibly helpful, and just really appreciate your comments and feedback.
Well, I'll be sure to send you a clip and you could play it before all of your meetings. How about that?
There you go.
So with that, we're going to sign off. So guys, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
You got it. You got it.
There you have it, Kristen and Cori. What a great talk. So much to learn here. And really, this is the gold standard. This is where we want to get to. And I'm just so grateful that Kristen and Cori could bring it to us here on the Demanding Value podcast. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And until we talk next time, thanks for listening.